of a role in our government. In the last 10 years, surveys show the number of people who say that the public officials don't care about what people like or what they think has ranged from 50% to 75%. That is 36% higher than 40 years ago. Polls show that many in the public feel the government is run by a few interest groups looking out for only themselves. A survey in the year 2000 found that over 60% of respondents cited that the influence of special interest groups is the reason for them not trusting the government. Looking at recent crises affecting the American people like Ebola today, the NRA is the only making matters worse. Thanks to the Senate dysfunction and the NRA opposition, we haven't had a Surgeon General for more than a year, even though the President has nominated Dr. Vivek Murthy back in November 2013. This is due to the fact that the NRA dislikes Obama's nomination and his opinions on how guns influence your health. With a strongly worded letter, the NRA was able to hold off the nomination. It is this kind of influence that must be downsized in our society.
You guys ready for questions?
Hold on. Okay. Are you guys ready for questions?
Ready.
Okay. Question.
Okay, so you say that special interest groups represent the ideas of all citizens. Is that correct?
Special interest groups have the ability to represent all citizens because all citizens have the capability of joining or creating their own interest groups.
But wouldn't you say that these special interest groups are primarily aimed towards big businesses and elite members of our society today?
These interest groups may go and focus on getting the support of big businesses. However, a lot of their backing and support comes from middle-class citizens that believe in their cause.
Okay. Are you aware that 2 weeks ago, prior to the November 4th elections, it had been reported that special interest groups had spent more than $1 million to secure Supreme Court positions by paying for large forms of media used to sway voters? It happened in over 5 states. How do you feel about this?
Well, this media that they are paying for is getting information out to citizens, and the money that they have is proportional to the amount of backing and support systems that they have, because the more of a support system they have, the greater amount of money will be donated to single issue groups.
Right.
Therefore, the more money they can spend on media to inform people about
This
issues
money
that are
isn't
important.
coming from a middle class. This is coming from high-level elites of our society that want to put specific people into power, so only specific things can happen through the court system.
Well,
so that's why they aim towards putting these people there, and they spend the money to put media forward to get people to vote for them. What do you respond to that?
Well, a lot of the money is coming from big businesses, but the citizens, the regular middle class, does have the capability to fund single issue groups. Just because big businesses have more money to fund, their opinions can be heard a little bit more, but that's just naturally going to happen.
Can you give me an example of middle class, like an organization that is primarily funded through the middle class?
Well, not many organizations are primarily funded through the middle class, but there is that opportunity there for funding from the middle class.
Just because they have the opportunity doesn't mean they're going to take it.
They only take it if they believe strongly and support that group.
Right. Most people only find that their political issues can be best supported by voting. Right? Is that correct? You agree with that? Okay. So saying that these people are going to get involved into interest groups where they feel even the small amount of money that they think they can add to it is not going to meet anywhere near the amount of money that big businesses or elites can offer to that organization. Do you feel that their voice will be heard just the same as those high level of individuals?
Well, that's the same kind of thinking as the people who don't believe in voting because they believe that their one small vote does not matter in the large scale of things, when in all reality it does matter. Because when a group of people come together with similar ideas, similar beliefs, they have the capability to have much larger effects.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm saying that because they don't have the money to put influence in to these interest groups, do you feel that they are less likely to participate in them?
I feel that that is the choice of the individual. Of course, with less money, they will be able to put a little less funding in, but at the end of the day, it is their choice whether or not they want to support groups, participate in like civic events, to campaign for and against what they believe in.
Would you agree with the statement that the American government is now increasingly responsive to special interests, meaning interests taken by large businesses or organizations rather than the general public interest?
I think a lot of our government is influenced by that. However, it is the job of single issue groups, especially those that can be funded by individual middle-class citizens. I believe it is their job to counteract the government, who primarily listens to big businesses.
Are you aware that the primary fundings for most candidates in general elections are paid for by these special interest groups?
I do realize that, but a lot of the money that they can give to candidates is proportional to their support group.
Do you feel that these groups, though, with their high influence, have more, say, influence over the candidates in deciding which candidates will be put where, rather than the general public's idea?
Well, a lot of candidates are affiliated with political parties. Therefore, their views, in a lot of ways, are dependent on re-elections. They're focused towards re-elections, focused towards the beliefs of their political party. These single issue groups come in with contrary beliefs to those of political parties, and they put checks and balances on the government. So they will be informed and almost forced to make the best possible decision.
So I have something to counter that. Large single interest groups have forced both parties to compromise their beliefs in order to gain funding and large support. The Democratic Party has been pushed farther to the right and has made it less responsive to many of its less affluent constituents, such as workers, minorities, and the poor. Are you aware of this?
Yeah.
That they compromise their party's integrity for funding just so they can so that their opinions can be thrown, like the big businesses and special interest groups can have a bigger say rather than a individual.
Well, do you realize that our three branches of government has a system of checks and balances on one another to make sure that they can't go too extreme to their sides?
I am very aware of that. But that is beyond the point. These special interest groups are pushing and compromising the general ideals of the Democratic Party. They're pushing them to the right, to a more conservative side.
Correct.
So you agree with that?
They are pushing them a little bit more to the conservative side, for in the example of Democrats. However, this sometimes is necessary to come to proper compromises between the two parties and single issue groups.
To forget about the general public.
No, not necessarily, because the Democrats are, of course, being pushed to the right. Republicans, however, are being pushed to the left. These can counteract each other.
By who's pushing the Republicans to the left?
That would be other single issue groups.
Do you have examples?
Any single issue group that opposes Republican groups.
So you don't have any solid examples?
Not necessarily, but there are thousands of single issue groups.
I just want to give you an example. I was curious. So, a quote from a American Political Science Association study. Recent analysis indicates that the government has become less responsive than it has been in several decades, and that is now particularly attentive to the view of affluent and business leaders. How do you feel about that? How do you feel that the government is becoming more focused on what business leaders want and these special interest groups want,
Well,
rather than the general public.
Well, the general public has the opportunity to become of these single issue groups, and the general public also contributes to these big businesses. Therefore, the beliefs of the general public is displayed in some way to counteract the beliefs of the government.
They aren't necessarily participating in the big business.
There's also voters that aren't necessarily, there's also people that are registered to vote that aren't necessarily going out to vote.
We're not talking about voting. We're talking about
That's true, but it's
the
same basic
influence
principle.
of business leaders on public policy.
Correct, but it's the same basic principle, that if citizens want to get involved, they have the right to do so. If they do not, or do not have the capability to, which in most
Right,
cases-
that's beyond the point. We're trying to understand that these special interest groups have more influence over the government than the general public. That's what we're trying to understand.
Special interest groups
Yes.
are made up of the general public in some ways.
Right, but they're more focused on specific topics, not generalized ideas, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that would mean that these larger groups, say of big business, are aimed towards getting one specific thing done.
Well, there are so many interest groups that are focused on getting one specific thing that a lot of the issues that need to be covered in our government are covered.
So let's take, for example, the Surgeon General. You're aware that we've not had that position filled for a little over a year now?
Yeah.
Okay, and do you understand why we haven't had that position filled?
Would you care to explain it?
I would. There is currently a senatorial dysfunction. They're not in agreement with the nomination that President Obama has made, and the NRA is having a high level of influence over that decision. How do you feel about that? That's something, especially with the recent scare of Ebola, and that is a position that the United States as a public feels that that position needs to be filled so we can protect the United States general population. But the NRA is is basically not allowing that position to be filled. How do you feel about that?
Well, this position does need to be filled, but this position, I believe, and I think a lot of American citizens believe, should be filled with the best candidate for this position. And the only way to achieve the best possible candidate, or to put the best possible candidate in that position, is through compromise.
The only reason why the NRA and the Senate does not want this Surgeon General to not be in office is because he feels that guns are not healthy. They're not healthy for the general public.
No, that's their right to disagree with the views of
But
that
now,
person.
because of that, they're having that influence over the Senate, and that's why
They're
their decision
having-
is not.
That because of one small topic, this large interest group is keeping a very extremely important political position, especially today with the rise of Ebola, empty.
What you're saying is gun control is a small issue to a lot of American
Okay, he's the
citizens.
Surgeon General.
Sure.
What do you think he's going to do about gun control? Like, people aren't going to really care. He's the Surgeon General. They're like health.
They do have a lot to do with health, but the argument that's being brought up is that guns affect health. Therefore, they are making it his job to focus on
He's
it.
just saying that they are not healthy. But he is probably the best, and I don't even understand where his reasoning behind that. But it's leaving this position empty. The president nominated him for this position over a year ago. If there was going to be compromise, it would have already been had.
Well, sometimes compromise takes a very long time in order to achieve the best possible results, but it is necessary in order for this country to
So
prosper.
you feel that it's acceptable to leave an extremely important position open because because of the influence from an interest group. The Republicans are scared. They want this guy in office, but they are scared to talk against him because they're afraid of losing his support, of the support of the NRA. They don't want to lose it and upset their party, so they do not want to vote against it.
Okay.
So the Republicans want this guy in office. They feel that he's the best fit for it, and they agree with the president. But they're afraid to speak up against that because they don't want to lose funding from the NRA. They don't want to lose the support that they get from the NRA.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
What's your time?
I got 12 minutes. Just let them answer this question.
Okay, could you repeat your question?
The Republicans are afraid of losing the support by the NRA.
That's not a question.
Well, can I finish? The Republicans are afraid of losing funding from the NRA, so they do not want to speak against this large special interest group. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel.
Do you feel that the special interest group has too much sway over this political decision?
I feel that the special interest group has a right to bring their opinions forward and address them to our government.
That doesn't
Okay,
answer my
time's up.
question. That didn't answer my question.
Well, your time's up.
I can answer. Yep.
You didn't answer my question. I would like an answer.
In the audience. Answer his question.
What?
Answer his question.
Just answer it. I want to know, do you feel that they have too much influence over this political decision?
I feel that in this one instance, they may have a little too much political
Thank you,
power.
that's all I
but
need.
in a lot
That's all I need. That's all I need.
Well, you can't come off, gotta let him, can't come off, gotta let him
But
finish it.
in general, there's a lot of other single issue groups other than the NRA.
Can you give me an example of
That's another question.
one? Fine, Eric, we will end it there.
Alright, what was your time, Ryan?
14:22.
Okay, you get 14 minutes.
And 22 seconds. We might be close.
I borrow this chair so I can
Go for it.
Alright. You guys ready?
Yep. Are you ready? I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah, we're done.
Okay. Do you agree with the system of checks and balances the United States has?
Of course.
Well, do you realize that similar to how the three branches of government check one another through this system of checks and balances, single issue groups check the government by forcing them to address problems that citizens deem important rather than the issues that the wealthy elite focus on that are in our government?
Most special interest groups are controlled by the wealthy elite. There are very few that are controlled by the general public in lower classes.
Could you give me some examples?
The NRA, for one, is very large. The NEA is very large, too. What else do we got? Let's see. How many are you looking for?
Sorry, just a ballpark.
What's the NEA?
NEA is National Education Association.
Isn't that more the liberal? So wouldn't that not be?
So
run by
these
big business?
single issue groups.
Not a Christian. It's not just big business. It's like the elite.
Well,
You can't. Write it down. Write your question down.
let it go.
Okay, so these single issue groups that you mentioned, a lot of their support comes from big businesses, but a lot of their support also comes from the civic actions of the middle class and the citizens who are not wealthy elite. Do you realize this?
Can you give me an example of this?
Just about every single issue group out there, there is civic engagement in the middle class, in the non-wealthy elite, to push these issues because it is something that they believe in.
Right, but you...
They don't necessarily need to be contributing money in order to make a difference.
Right, but what you're saying is, basically you're hurting yourself by saying this because you're saying that these special interest groups have an influence over the general public, having a more general
I'm not saying
influence
the
over
general
public policy, right. But with saying that, you're saying that these special interest groups have more influence over the general public and have more influence over public policy.
I'm saying that the general public believes in what the single issue groups stand for. Therefore, the single issue groups take these ideas from the citizens and address them and bring them up to our government.
Right, I understand.
Good. Moving on. Studies show the amount of people in political parties is decreasing, but many of these people are happy to sign up for single issue campaigns. Why do you think this is?
They're not happy with the way that their parties are being run.
Exactly. So would you agree that because they're not happy with their parties, they go to single issue groups in which they believe strongly in to go to their government and try to get things changed that they disagree with? Because it's what the citizens want.
It would only be in a general one-topic subject, and if they feel that their party isn't, say you're a Republican and you are pro-choice, but your party isn't pro-choice.
Okay,
So you're going to go to a single interest group that believes in pro-choice.
correct.
So it's not so much of they're losing, they're just not focused on the topics that they want, so they find outside sources.
So they go to single issue groups to help those issues be addressed.
Correct. I'll agree with that.
Okay.
But by saying that, you're still saying that these special interest groups have a very large influence over public policy.
The only reason they have an influence, this influence that they have, is necessary because it's what the citizens believe is necessary to be brought up to the government. And by virtue of being necessary, their power is not
By
too
the
great.
question, it says, do special interest groups have too much influence?
They do not, because their influence is necessary. By virtue of being necessary, they cannot have too much power.
You can always have too much power. There's always
Not if
one
your
way to
not
have
if the amount of power that you have is necessary.
So you're saying, I'll go back to my Surgeon General thing. Do you think that's necessary? Do you feel that the Surgeon
I'm sorry,
General...
who's asking the questions here?
it's more of a statement. I just want you to think about what you're saying in comparison to what I'm saying.
I've thought about it. Okay. Additionally, single interest groups often claim or are given responsibility for election outcomes and policy enactments, regardless of whether or not their lobbying made the difference. How would you respond to this?
Can you repeat the question?
Single issue groups often claim or are given responsibility for election outcomes and policy enactments, regardless of whether or not their lobbying made the difference in the outcome. How would you respond to this?
Most of the time, their lobbying and their funding towards campaigns usually have a very large influence on which candidates are chosen and which public policies are pushed through.
Well, a lot of times they are given responsibility for changing the outcome of elections or having certain policies pushed. However, they do not their lobbying did not actually make the difference.
And can you give me an example of a situation where the lobbying did not make a difference?
We can't necessarily pinpoint an example of this because it happens all the time.
Oh, so it happens all the time, so you should have several examples then. Can you give me at least 3 then?
It does happen all the time, but it is near impossible to pinpoint a specific example because
If it happens all the time, there's got to be something. You can't just tell me that happens all the time and give me nothing.
well, we know that it does happen. We don't necessarily need to know what specific groups this has happened to and when it's happened.
Well,
We know that it has happened.
Can you give me, I want an example of when it did happen. If it happens all the time, even if it's a small group or a big group or even one in the middle, it has to have happened. There has to be some record of it happening.
I'm sure there are records somewhere. I
But
do not
you
have
just do not
any
have
with
any?
me.
Okay. Next question.
Okay, the Southern Poverty Law Center fights against hate crimes, monitoring them and reporting them to the authorities. Would you say that this simple action of finding and reporting hate crimes affects our public policy more than it should? No. Well, that's what they do. Therefore, they do not influence our public policy more than they should.
That's not a political group. That's almost like a city watch. It's
It's
like some guy
they are
walking down the
single-issue groups
street.
against hate crimes.
Right, but they don't really have a say in.
But are they a single issue group, yes or no?
Yes, but they're not politically based.
They don't need to be. They are a single issue group who do not have too much
Right.
influence on public policy, correct? Correct. Are you an advocate of the Jim Crow laws? Could you please answer the question? I have a point.
Not in the slightest.
Are you a racist?
Not in the slightest.
Good, that's a good thing. Well, do you agree that citizens' opinions matter when it comes to government? In other words, do you believe that the consent of the governed is a beneficial system?
Repeat the question. I'm baffled in the answer. Question in 2014. This isn't like 1950. I don't.
Okay, do you believe that consent of the governed is a beneficial system? Or in other words, do you believe that citizens' opinions matter?
Yes.
Okay, well, do you realize that the civil rights movement, which fought against things like the Jim Crow laws, was initiated by groups of people coming together and protesting and standing up for what they believe in, as do special interest groups. That is what special interest groups are. They are groups of people with
I
similar
want
beliefs
you to
coming
understand
together.
something right now. You are hurting your cause.
I am not.
You're saying that these special interest groups are having a very large influence over public policy.
That's not what I'm
As
saying.
an example of the civil rights. That's what you just said.
I'm saying
there
that
were
a lot of
people in the
times-
60s that were against these civil rights movements.
True.
right? So you're saying that these large, single-interest civil rights groups have a very large influence over public policy.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they
That's
do.
exactly what you
I'm-
just said.
I am saying that they have an influence. However, in order for our country to prosper, this influence is completely necessary.
I'm
We
not
need
saying it's
this.
not necessary,
So
but
therefore
it
it's
may
not too
be,
much.
it may not be,
If it's backed by the majority and it is necessary for our country to prosper, how is that too much power?
it's not taking the ideas of all the general public.
It's taking the ideas of the majority of the general public.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
It's taking, it's taking the ideas from the majority of the general public.
Right, but it's still a single interest group having a large majority of power.
That is necessary. Not too much, but necessary. In order for our country to prosper.